In this world, it is best to be self-sufficient, but never forsake your dependable friends. This war has taken too much of our family. There may come a day you need help of a stranger, as so many have needed help from us. You can make friends by being honest, and you can keep them by being loyal. Those friends will expect you to be trustworthy too.
You are listening to Historyman, the platform for historians, curators, and authors to tell their stories of the American Revolution, walk in the footsteps of heroes, and proclaim freedom reigns. On today's episode, we are with SHeila Ingle in her book, Brave Elizabeth. So welcome, SHeila.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
SHeila, how can people get a hold of your book as we start this thing off?
Amazon, bookstores all over South Carolina. They can get it in museums. Yorktown Museum carries my books. Just Google it, like I say, with that kind of information.
SHeila, you got a background in history and education. You were a teacher, a professor, you're now an author, a historian. You're held in such high regard in South Carolina. This is not the only book you've written. You've written a number of books. How many books altogether?
5.
5 books altogether.
Yes, sir.
And then you've published several articles, or a couple articles in the 250th Commission website, where people can go to for free and delve into some of the historical narratives coming out of this state. What a wonderful state to live in. What a wonderful history that our state has in the founding of the United States. The reasons for those foundings are lost in many respects. I think our listeners will come away from this episode at least knowing some of the reasons that people fought here in South Carolina for the independence of our country. And the creation of our country. It wasn't even a country. They didn't
That's
even know.
right.
While they were fighting, they didn't even know it was going to turn into a country. They had hope. And where there's breath, there's hope.
Yes, exactly. South Carolina motto.
So SHeila, tell us about your book.
Okay, Elizabeth Jackson was the mother of President Andrew Jackson. So that gives her some credence right there, it seems like to me. He is the only president that was born in South Carolina, number 1. And of course, being the mother of the only South Carolina president of the United States, that's big, I think. And her story is big.
Her story is big and tragic.
It is.
But it's also, I think, a call to action for any young-blooded American. Take some lessons from her life and apply that to their own life. What a heroic life she had.
This saying, keep on keeping on, comes to my mind when I think about Elizabeth, because she seemed to lose so much as her life was concerned here. What we would think of loss is concerned. She and her husband, Andrew Jackson Sr., left Ireland with 2 toddlers, 3 and 1. They came over here because he wanted a new life. He'd had enough. He was a tenant farmer in Ireland, and he wanted more. He wanted land. Even though they had linen in their background, she was an excellent spinner. He was a weaver. They had good jobs over there. They wanted a place where they could own land. And she already had family over here with sisters over here. And so she was open to coming to America. And that's what they did. And they went to where her sisters were living in the Waxhaws. It was called that then. That's Lancaster County today. But the Waxhaws, which is a beautiful place in the upstate. Again, all the upstate during this time must have been just a gorgeous wilderness.
Describe the topography in
Okay.
the state.
Good rivers that were teeming with fish, turtles, all those kinds of things. Healthy, clean rivers. Lots of animals that were everywhere. Plenty to eat, plenty to hunt. And red clay over there in the Waxhaws.
Right.
Yes.
So the fall line actually separates the low country from the upstate, and this is where the you're starting to get clay and rolling hills into the Piedmont of North and South Carolina.
Right. Good farmland
Right.
for the most part, yes. And of course, they were dependent. I mean, there was no Walmart back then to go run to. There was nothing like that. They had to grow their own. They were independent farmers.
We had talked on another episode about the Scotch-Irish, and you just said they were from Ireland. Were they Scotch-Irish, or were they actually Irish?
They were Scotch-Irish also. Both sides of the families, both Andrew and Elizabeth, were from those original people that were brought into Northern Ireland.
You know,
yes.
so much of our lives and our personalities are some of the family histories that we bring with us and we bring to the table and that are passed down. And our outlook or our viewpoint on life, and certainly the Scotch-Irish had a unique perspective on life that maybe was a little different than the planters from the Low Country over near the coast, or even the Huguenots that came from France. What was different about the Scotch-Irish in the way they perceived the world?
Well, one thing, they were firm believers in education. That's something that I have been noticing about them in my research. They all were, and it wasn't just education for their sons, it was education for their daughters also. Everybody was literate. They believed in the written word, and they believed in passing down stories about their families too. That's one of the things that I read about as far as Elizabeth was concerned, that she told family stories to her sons about how the Scotch-Irish had in different, or the Irish had in different places, fought the English in Ireland for a little piece of land, a little castle or something like that, and they won. And that was important to them also. Liberty, I'll just use that word. They did not want people holding them back, holding them down, and they wanted to be the best they could be wherever it was, and they did not feel like it was like that in Ireland. So we had wave after wave after wave of Scotch-Irish coming to America to get that kind of lifestyle where they could make their own time.
I'm going to go down a rabbit hole that I so often do on these episodes, but when I think about the education and background of the Scotch-Irish, and especially in the backcountry, I can't help but remember that this is also the time of the Scottish Enlightenment, and how that played into their ideas of freedom and liberty, and their associations and their viewpoint on government. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, it was deep-rooted in them, and I think that came from back several generations where they had been just not allowed to do what they wanted to do, not allowed to be what they wanted to be even. And it was deeply rooted in not only in their mindset, but almost in their, it was a blood thing with them, you know. Andrew's brothers, one had been in the Navy and had been all over the world, loved the sea, had that adventure, some bent, I guess you would say, in him, and had enjoyed that. The other brother, the older brother Hugh, he had been in the British Army here in the colonies, and he came back with stories about the land again, about it being so open, it being plenty of it, and you could come over here and you could make something of yourselves. And so they both brought those visions back to their younger brother Andrew, and it was like he caught it. You know, there's something better out there for me, and I want to go for it. And so his coming here was probably a family-oriented thought process that, okay, there's the opportunity. Let's go to the Carolinas.
So this is Andrew Sr.
Yes,
Andrew
yes,
Sr.
yes.
Okay, so when did they get here?
Again, we're looking at mid-1700s. Some people say that they came into Charleston and went up the road to Camden and then into the Wax House. But there's another group that says they went into one of them, like Philadelphia or somewhere else. So that is something that is sort of We don't know exactly where they came in. But the fact is, they were pointed in the direction of the Waxhaws because of her sisters and their families already living there. So that was good. So many families came without anybody to join or be a part of. Now, they didn't live close to her sisters. He bought some land, 200 acres, a little bit ways, and it was not as fertile as the land close to the Waxhaws Presbyterian Meeting House where they went to church, but it was good. It was good land. And, of course, the families got together, built their one-room log cabin. The children were growing up there, and they were only here a couple of years when Andrew had an accident and died. She was pregnant with Andy, and there she was, a widow with 2 children under the age of 5 and expecting another one. So,
was it an unusual death?
It was a death. They don't know exactly what happened to him. He was out cutting some wood, and something happened. I wrote about it as a possible hernia that he might have had in doing some, and with there being no doctors, no hospitals, no nothing, that would be a destructive kind of something that could kill a person. And that's all that's known, is that it was an accident and he was cutting wood. But that was enough. And if you think about it, maybe there was a misstep with the axe or something and cut himself. It's really unknown what happened, but he died within just a little while.
Well,
so
thank goodness she had a family around.
Exactly. And of course she was invited to go and live with her sister and brother-in-law and their children. She and the 3 young ones, and that's what they did. And she became the housekeeper, the second mother, because her sister was sickly, couldn't do a whole lot, and so she immediately found a place with her extended family, would be what it was. And she took...
So her nephews kind of became her second children.
Exactly.
Right.
There was a whole slew of them, yes,
Right.
that did. 8 of them, as a matter of fact.
Wow.
That became her second children, yeah. Right.
So did she move from her 200-acre farm over to them, closer into the Waxhaws?
Moved in with them. She did. They invited her, and she did. It was a large house. It was a large house that had a second story, like the house in Brattonsville and like the house at Walnut Grove. And the kids had the upstairs, and then the adults had the downstairs. And she taught the girls the things they needed to know. Her sons were taught by their uncle the things they needed to know. It was very much a divided set of workload between the 2 sexes during this particular time. Everybody had their set things that they did, but they all worked together to do what they needed to do as far as the farm was concerned. We're looking at a farming community.
What happened during the Revolutionary War?
Her oldest son, Hugh, he was 16. He was the first to go off to war. He was in the Battle of Stono Ferry down near Charleston, and he died of heat exhaustion. This was a battle that happened in June. But he was sick when he left. That's the way the information goes. And obviously, if anybody knows anything about South Carolina and the heat in the low country and the humidity and battle heat, with you talking about all this, the firing that was going to be going on and everything, he was overcome in some way and died at that particular battle. Some stories say that his body was brought back to her. He is buried next to his father in the Waxhaw Presbyterian Meeting House Cemetery. Some say that he died there at the scene. But anyway, that was the first person she said goodbye to in that particular war. The next thing that happened to them was in May of 1780. When you have the Battle of the Waxhaws, very close to where they lived. She and her two second sons, Robert and Andy, went to, they saw part of the battle. They went to the battle. They helped those that, from the Army in Virginia, that were killed by Tarleton and his men. And when I say killed, I'm going to use the word butchered, because they were bayoneted. They had limbs cut off. It was an ugly, ugly scene. And that 14-year-old Robert and that 12-year-old Andy saw war up front and personal for the first time. And they were horrified, and of course immediately, being the young, I will call them patriots that they were at that time, because they loved the land, they loved their family, they wanted to defend it against such. They wanted to go to war. Well, Elizabeth, or Betty, as she was called by her family and friends, she wasn't about to let a 14 and a 12-year-old go off to war.
She had come to a new country. She had lost her husband. She lost her firstborn.
Right.
How many does she have left?
She has 2 left, and she's not ready to send them off to war at all. Makes perfect sense to me. Makes perfect sense. She held them off a few months. That's what she did, held them off. And then one of their friends, the nephew of the Reverend William Richardson Davy, he was in the vicinity. He was the one that was the leader of the group that was at the Battle of Stono Ferry. She knew the family, and he said that he would take the 2 boys on. He would keep them safe. He would give them jobs to do that would not put them in the front lines. But that's who she signed them up for, to work, because it was
So William Richardson is not who.
No, that's the minister.
That's the minister.
That's the minister. He's the uncle of William Richardson Davy.
Because William Richardson Davy actually studied for the ministry at one time too.
Right. But did not get called. Did not get called. Yeah, William Richardson, the minister, is a whole nother story about that.
Okay, all right.
Andy became the young one that took care of the horses. That was his job. And I thought, when I read that, I thought, okay, that's not too important. That's a good, safe place to be. But I wasn't thinking clearly about fire, a battle, horses, hearing those sounds, that kind of thing, the fear that they would have. That was a major operation to keep those horses tied up and settled so they did not break away and leave the scene. So he had a very important job during this time, and did well. He was commended by the things that he did.
Every 3rd or 4th person was someone who held the horse.
Yes.
All right. So you maybe have 100 fighters, but 25 of them going into a battle. 25 of them are holding horses, right?
Right.
So because you have to hold. And you can only hold so many horses at one time, right?
Exactly.
Especially when the gunfire
2 hands.
So, but they were very important.
And I'm sure he knew that. And at age 12, 13, as he turned 13, that would have been an important plus for him, I think, as a man later in life, to know that he was a part of that Revolutionary War, and he helped them win those battles by keeping the horses there for them.
In your research, did you find anywhere where he was a messenger for William Davy to go back and forth to different people or different groups?
He probably did some of that too, because the people, it was sort of like a set group of assignments that they had. And so of course he would have been a messenger person, because he was a good horseman to begin with, because of his training and living on the farm, all that kind of stuff. But the fact that they did not send their sharpshooters with messengers. It was the young ones on the totem post, so to speak, that did things like that, yes. And that was one of the ways that they got caught, he and Robert, by the British. because it was the next spring after the Waxhaws battle, after Hanging Rock and several of the others that they were involved in, that they were captured by the British in their cousin's home, which is another tale about him. He and Robert were being chased by the British. They went to their cousin's house, which rather than going to their mother's house there in the Waxhaws, they went to their cousin's house. They were caught there by the British. You might have, I remember seeing in my South Carolina history book a long time ago, a picture of Andy and his brother and that captain with a raised saber in his hand that he eventually brought down on Andy and his brother. Andy took the blow from the saber on the side of his face and also his arm, all because he told the man no, that he was not going to clean his boots. That was what the British officer demanded of him, and he said no. And then Robert said the same thing, and so he got slashed up, and the boys we're looking at now 13 and 15. They were bound. They were marched to the Camden jail. Probably saw their mother as they were marched by with other prisoners down to that Camden jail that was full of smallpox and full of people that were not their friends.
Sure. So we have open wounds from the sabers. Yes. Robert, the oldest brother, 15-year-old?
Yes.
His wound was pretty serious.
It was.
A lot more serious than Andy's.
Right.
Not minimizing Andy's wound
exactly.
at all, because sepsis can set in on any wound.
Exactly.
Especially during that time, because there's the medical facilities are not what they are today, but that was a serious wound that his brother, in fact, I'm not sure his brother survived from that wound.
It was the smallpox that took him out, took him out. Okay. That was one of the things that was in that jail. It was just all over the place in that jail. And of course, smallpox back then, even though General Washington had made sure that he had inoculated all his troops during the Valley Forge sojourn, everybody who was not inoculated. It was not something that was common procedure back then. And so, of course, once the smallpox was in the jail, it went rampant. Everybody caught it. And so by the time that Betty, Elizabeth, as we call her each name, she went down and got her sons exchanged after the Battle of Camden. She was able to get an exchange going with Colonel Rowden, and she did that and got them out. By the time she got Robert and Andy home to the Waxhaws, the smallpox was just raging in him, and he died. She could not save his life.
She's lost her
second child. Andy, it took him all summer to recover from the smallpox. He also got malaria on the side. And so he was probably a walking skeleton by the time that he was able to really get off his bed and do anything. Those were serious, serious illnesses back then. And the thing about it is, Elizabeth she found out that 3 of her nephews were on the prison ships in Charleston. And this was 3 of those nephews that she had raised in the home there all those years. And she decided, since Andy was doing pretty well, he was on his feet, he could stay with his other uncle, that he'd be okay, she had to go see about them. She just felt it in her heart. She had to go see about it.
And this is the sickly sister's children.
Exactly.
Did the sickly sister go with her?
No, sickly sister has died.
She has died.
She has died.
She's lost her sister. She's lost her husband. She's lost 2 children.
Yes.
She's the only woman figure in that home at this point.
Right. Only one standing,
Is
so
the
to
uncle
speak.
still there, or is he in the
The uncle is wounded, but he is still alive, not able to do a whole lot.
It's about to decimate this whole
Exactly. It is. It's serious doings. Serious doings.
So what does she do? She finds out they're on those prison ships.
Right. She decides she's going to go down there. 2 other women from the community decide to ride with her. This is in the Waxhaws, and they're going to Charleston, okay? This is looking at several days worth of riding. They're going to take medicines with them, probably had some food, that kind of thing. It was like she was compelled. Everything I read about Elizabeth, it was like she was compelled to do this, that, and the other. She was compelled to go and nurse those men over the Waxhaws.
That's not unlike some of the women mothers of today.
Exactly. You'll do whatever, and you know in your heart that it's the right thing to do.
Right.
That's why she went off to Charleston and left her youngest there with his other uncle.
Did she give him any parting words?
She did. She did give him some parting words. Basically, she told him to be a good friend. She was very into that. It was interesting with her. Well, 2 lines.
Do you have the letter?
Yeah, I do.
You want to read the whole thing?
No, but I want to read the last part of it,
okay,
because I think it's very important, because I think it defines what she was saying. She says, "Shrink not from the service of your country. Your country deserves the love and thanks of man and woman." That to me was very important to her and to him. She told him not to take loans from anybody in the course of her letter, which I thought that was interesting. Whether that was to make him feel like he was independent, I guess, for lack of a better word, possibly independent. But she found that to be very important. She made sure that Andy got a good education. She sent him to the church schools there in the area. Each one of the meeting houses, most of them, had a church school that the kids went to when they weren't having to work on the farm or that kind of thing. And so she made sure that they had to do that. And that, to me, was very important. She wanted him to be self-reliant. And, I am going to read this. I'm going to go back and read what I included in it. "Andrew, if I should not see you again, I wish you to remember and treasure up some things I have already said to you. In this world, it is best to be self-sufficient, but never forsake your dependable friends. This war has taken too much of our family. There may come a day you need help of a stranger, as so many have needed help from us. You can make friends by being honest, and you can keep them by being loyal. Those friends will expect you to be trustworthy too. In personal contact, always be courteous. I have seen that temper of yours overcome your sound judgment. No one likes a bully, Andy. If your saber scars remind you of that, then you will always be the honorable and compassionate man I have watched you become. I love you, Andy, and I am most proud of the man you are and the man you are becoming."
That gets you choked up.
Little bit.
Yeah.
Not always, but it did today.
Yeah.
And the thing about it is, she left him in a good way. She left him with words of encouragement, with words of love, with advice, all 3, to becoming the man that he was. And even though she died in Charleston after being on those prison ships, he never saw her again. He never found out where she was buried, even though he went to Charleston, even though he tried to find where her burial place was. She was buried somewhere outside the city by some former friends of hers from the Waxhaws that were down there. He never forgot her. He talked about her in his letters. He talked about the influence that she had on him. And it was almost like he didn't forget what the British had done to him too. He carried those wounds with him, as she mentioned, with him all his life. Probably had a lot to do with the fierceness at the Battle of New Orleans. that he led our men into with that. But he talked about her in such a caring way that he had learned so much from her. And he talked about her very small Bible she kept in her pockets all the time, that she was a praying woman. She was a good friend. She knew about that good friend part that she was talking about to him, because she had been a good friend to Reverend William Richardson's wife, who had been accused of killing her husband, which was another little episode in the Waxhaw community. Reverend William Richardson, and he was a good preacher, good friend to the people that he worked with in his community, but he committed suicide. He hung himself in his home, in his library, and he was found kneeling beside a chair hanging from the ceiling. The people in the community felt like his wife might have had something to do with it, but she didn't. The thing about it was that Elizabeth was his wife's good friend. She stood by her. She went to church with her when people would turn away from her, when she would go in the church building, that kind of thing. She was a true friend to someone that for a season was considered not excommunicated from the church or the community, but rebuffed from the church.
Under suspicion.
Under suspicion, right.
What would you want people to take? I mean, these are great stories. I think what I like, we have a tendency to romanticize history, and especially in the South. Good gracious. But I think what I like about these stories is the raw, organic, real aspect of these stories. These really happened. These were real people.
Exactly.
We're not talking about some fictitious hero fighting for a fictitious world. We're talking about real people with scars, marks, and all sorts of insecurities and flaws, fighting for something that we end up living within the bounty of what they created, a new world, which is a new country. What would you want people to take away from your stories of these women?
They didn't give up. They did the next thing. That's something that my grandmother used to tell us, and she lived it out as a young widow that inherited a farm in Kentucky and kept that farm until she went blind. And she kept on doing each day. She did the next thing, whatever that next thing was. And these women did that, whether it was mending a shirt from one of the children, whether it was hunting when the husbands were not there, when she would go out with her rifle and kill a deer and bring it home and do what she needed to do to put food on the table, or whether it was nursing a loved one at her own expense, like Elizabeth did when going to see about her nephews. They just did the next thing, and I admire that. I admire that.
There's nothing wrong with admiring those personality traits that are positive, is there?
I don't think so.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.